Welcome to Cliburn Masterpiece. I'm Buddy Bray. I'm your host for Masterpiece, and we come to you from the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. In Cliburn Masterpiece, we investigate some of the greatest works ever written for piano. We also take a look at some unique corners in the piano repertoire. We talk to some of our Cliburn laureates and other experts in the fields of music. Today on Cliburn Masterpiece, a work by Felix Mendelssohn, his Scottish Fantasy, Opus 28, as played in the 2017 Van Cliburn International Piano Competition by Jury Discretionary Award winner Dasol Kim. We'll talk to Dasol Kim. We'll also have a lively conversation with Joseph Kalichstein, who's a professor of piano and chamber music at the Juilliard School. Here's our conversation with Dasol Kim and Joseph Kalichstein. What is it that is attractive to you about the music of Mendelssohn? What draws you to Mendelssohn?
Well, God, so many things. Firstly, the ease with which you can feel the ease with which he writes. It just very much like Mozart. It just pours out of him. And unlike Mozart, the challenges are not as big. You know, you don't have this having to concentrate on tiny little details. He's very generous. The music is very generous. It's also, as hard as it is, it's very pianistic, you know, because he was a great pianist, and you feel like you're improvising a lot of the time. Also, I love his honesty. There's a kind of integrity to his expression. It's never forced, it's never artificial.
Mendelssohn was such a genius. I mean, he made it everything, especially the line of the melody, how it should go, because it's so lyrical. And I didn't have to find a way how to bring it out because it's so natural and it's just so beautiful, just how it's written.
All you have to know is his octet. It is string octet, which he wrote when he was 17, which is perfection from every point of view, instrumentally, compositionally. So you just sit there, marvel how a human being can create that. And a lot of his music is on that level. I think he got a bad rap because he was so great so early. So people assume that things that he wrote later, I mean, he didn't die, so he died young. But still, there's a later Mendelssohn, because when he was 13, he wrote a piano quartet for Goethe. He used to have discussions with Goethe when he was 13. So people assume that the later works are not as great. I think part of his problem was he was from a well-to-do family, so he didn't suffer. We love the suffering artist. You know, we sympathize with poor Schubert, who was dying and penniless and all that. But not every poor person is a genius, and not every rich person is a dilettante. And he was lucky. He had the money and he had the fame. You know, he was a big shot conductor, and he didn't suffer, but the music is still incredible and full of expression.
And the hard part was probably the technical matter, because it's very somewhat like Mozart or Chopin. It's not virtuosic. The hard part is very unobvious. It's very, very difficult, and the clarity of the character and the very fast notes and the scales and arpeggios. They are very randomly put, actually, when you look at the music, and it just looks very, very easy, or it sounds like it's very easy, but it's just not. And as a pianist, although it is very difficult and challenging, at the end I need to actually make it sound like it's not. You know, that was very delicate work.
One word that you used is clarity. And in a lot of ways, this is very challenging in Mendelssohn because, as you say, It does look actually on the page very clean. It looks that way. And that makes us think that we have to play it that way too. And then you have likened it to Mozart and Chopin, both of whom are composers for which there is nothing extra. There is nothing to hide behind. Do you think probably that he was really quite a virtuoso pianist himself? I'm thinking of the way in which he wrote for the piano, which, as you say, it was a very fluid way of writing for the piano.
And
very fluid.
Especially very early pieces. Quite fascinating, actually, considering that he was such a great pianist. After he was very young, he wrote the first piano concerto, I think, when he was 19, and he wrote it for himself. And it's you need a lot of fingers and stamina. But as he grew older, he was less interested in the piano as a virtuoso. There are very few major big pieces. There are lots of course, the famous songs without words, which are intimate little pieces. Some of them difficult, but not in the same way difficult. And the only two major works are this Fantasy and the Variations Sérieuses.
Can we talk a little bit about the piece as a whole drama? What do you think about in performing the piece as a whole? What are you trying to convey to the audience?
In my opinion, and unfortunately, this piece is very under-documented. There are not many lectures or books or anything about this piece. So I had to always rely on my own opinions when I was working on this piece. And in my opinion, these are three very different movements. And especially when I think about the first movement, it's about nature, I would say. This piece also has a little title that has Scottish fantasy. And it's very funny. Mendelssohn himself also, his third symphony, I think its third symphony is the Scottish, and the famous Scottish fantasy by Brooke for orchestra and violin. And whenever a composer says Scottish, it's very rare atmosphere, I would say. It's beautiful, but it's not just pretty. It's about that mountain. It's not Switzerland mountain. It's it's up north. It's cold. It's very foggy, and it's very lonely, and it's very mystic in the air.
I just find this particular piece very special to me for many reasons. As I said, there are only two great major pieces of his, and that's certainly one of them. I am speaking about his relationship with Beethoven. I'm convinced this piece was inspired by the Moonlight Sonata. I'll tell you why. First of all, it's one of the very few pieces, in either case, in Beethoven and Mendelssohn, that the first movement is in minor key, and the last movement is also in minor key. That's almost unheard of, because usually when the piece starts in a minor, it's going to end in a major. You can go through thousands of classical works. These two, like the Appassionata actually too, the first and last movement are both in a minor. The first movement in both cases is fantasy. I mean, obviously this, Beethoven takes you to some dreamland. And certainly you don't expect a sonata to start like that, because usually a sonata presents a fast movement to start with, And Mendelssohn also, when he starts, it's rhapsodic immediately. And then comes the theme but the movement is a rhapsody. That's why the word fantasy really, because it's not a real sonata. So that's like the Moonlight Sonata. The last movement in both cases, very fast, very crazed, very virtuosic, a storm, tremendous storm. And in both cases, the middle movement is silly. It's unimportant. I always felt that Beethoven thought that between this and that, he couldn't have a major expression full of a slow movement, full of expression. It would have been too much. So he writes this silly little minuet. And Mendelssohn too writes a little second movement, which is lovely, but it's not aspiring to be either significant or deep or anything, because he knew he needed a contrast to those two outer movements, which are just so full of imagination.
Oh, that second movement is very, very, very naive also. It's very, very honest. And also the harmony is very typical Mendelssohn harmonies. And the only happy moment of this piece, actually.
He is capable of that very simple kind of melody, as you say. Concept of playing something simply, not to impose yourself on something, to have a little remove, and to play something simply. How do you make yourself do that? If you're a thinking person, it's hard to play something simply.
Well, I think that's why there's a process. I think if you heard the very first, let's assume I'm a great reader and I'm going to read the notes perfectly on the first time, that performance would never be simple the very first time, because you try to put stuff in it. You say to yourself, hey, that's interesting. And I think that's why the process, you try to peel away artificiality. The great art is to know how much you can take away and still keep the important part. And I think that's what you do. You start off with too much, and then you have to be very almost cruel. You cut away things that, you have to throw away things that are not bad. And of course, there's the danger that you do too little too. So that's part of the practicing. Practicing is not only to get the notes right. It's to find how just the balance between what the piece needs.
Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about the concept of tempo in Mendelssohn? I think it's very important in Mendelssohn, because sometimes it's the difference between Mendelssohn staying on the ground and really taking flight. So particularly in the last movement of this fantasy that is the subject of this program, tempo seems very important here. Yeah. And especially when Mendelssohn is, again, in 6/8, the spinning song, the Rondo Capriccioso. How do you find just the right sweet spot there?
I don't know if there's one sweet spot, because that very much depends on your technical ability. If you can keep it light and clear, you should play it as fast as possible. It's all about the fiery and the passion, and sometimes the passion doesn't have to be very fast, but passion comes first, and the sweep. So had I known I would want to demonstrate, I would have practiced, but I'm not going to dare play the last movement cold and not having practice. But you need a sweep. You need to feel like some, if you remember Saturday morning cartoons, there was a wonderful Hanna-Barbera character called the Tasmanian Devil. Do you remember it?
Yes, yes.
And I've seen the Tasmanian Devil. They're nasty little creatures, but that character had nothing to do with, that character would come into a room like this, like a tornado. Sorry to say tornado in Texas. I know it's dangerous, but it's like a tornado. And Mendelssohn is like that.
And he loved to write, of course, in a very quick 6/8. He did it, all the time. That one and that. He loved to do that. How did you practice that movement? Did you practice it fast right away, or did you work up to that?
I always work up to something. I practiced slowly, like for a long time, and good friend of mine, metronome, was always next to me. Yeah, and yeah, I mean that was the last movement is very challenging pianistically.
What attracted you to the piece? Why did you want to play it?
I mean, when it's about a competition, making different sets of a repertoire is very challenging as well. And when I was creating this semifinal recital program, I wanted to give, of course, my some pieces of my best repertoire, and they happened to be, most of them were German repertoire. And I was thinking there was Mendelssohn Fantasy in the list, and then my personal list. And I was thinking this piece, as you said, it's performed very, very rarely. And I thought that's actually too bad because it's such a masterpiece.
And now from the semifinal round of the 2017 edition of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, here is pianist Dasol in Mendelssohn's Fantasy for Piano, Opus 28. a scintillating performance from the 2017 edition of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. That was Jury Discretionary Award winner Dasol Kim in Felix Mendelssohn's Scottish Fantasy, Opus 28. Our thanks to Dasol for talking to us about the Mendelssohn Fantasy, and also to longtime friend of the Cliburn and longtime Cliburn juror, Joseph Kalichstein, for talking to us as well. I'm Buddy Bray. Thanks for joining us for Cliburn Masterpiece.